Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Despite the storm of criticism around her Brexit divorce proposals, Theresa May has won the support of some key ministers after 48 hours in which it looked as if her future as Prime Minister was on the line. In today's developments, Stephen Barclay, a health minister who supported the Leave campaign, has been promoted to Brexit Secretary, replacing Dominic Raab, who resigned yesterday. And the former Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, returns to Cabinet as Work and Pensions Secretary. Despite speculation that he would quit in protest at the Prime Minister's draft agreement, the leading Brexiteer Michael Gove has thrown his support behind Theresa May and remains in post as the Environment Secretary. But the Prime Minister's position remains uncertain, with the number of Conservative backbenchers who say they submitted a letter calling for a vote of no confidence in her leadership rising. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, has the latest. Just to tell you, her report contains some flashing images.
Imagine submitting yourself first thing in the morning to this.
And here in the studio with me, the Prime Minister.
Literally taking a call from the public, asking you to quit.
Why do you think you should stay on as PM when you have failed, despite your no doubt honourable intentions to run this referendum results? And if you cannot do that, I respectfully ask you to do the right thing in the national interest and stand down to allow someone from the Brexit camp to take the lead.
I believe that we've got a good deal from the European... We've still got some things to sort out with them, but I believe we've got a good deal from the European Union, and that's what I'll put to Parliament.
She was more keen to pitch her Brexit compromise. This message needs to be convincing to survive.
My job is to persuade, first and foremost, my Conservative benches, those who are working with us, the DUP are working with us, obviously in confidence and supply, but I want to be able to say to all parliamentarians, every MP, I truly believe this is the best deal for Britain.
Will you be resigning today, Mr Gove?
Morning.
He doesn't think it's much of a good deal. But after wobbling and wavering, look, the Minister's red box still in his hand.
Do you have confidence in the Prime Minister, Mr Gove?
I absolutely do. I'm also looking forward to continuing to work with all my government colleagues and all my colleagues in Parliament in order to make sure that we get the best future for Britain. I think it's absolutely vital that we focus on getting the right deal in the future and making sure that in the areas that matter so much to the British people, we can get a good outcome. Thank you very much.
We know this Cabinet Minister, Penny Mordaunt, doesn't like the agreement that much either. But neither is she going anywhere fast.
I've not got anything to say, I'm afraid, to you this morning.
And look who's back. Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary. Yet to remember, she gets a ministerial car, along with her new job at Pensions. And you'll soon hear more of this man. Meet Steve Barclay, a big promotion for him to the new Brexit Secretary. And the Prime Minister's most loyal lieutenants are fighting to close the argument down.
The Prime Minister can survive and thrive. I mean, this is a woman who comes into the office every day not to look for media opportunities, but for doing her public duty. It's old-fashioned, decent public service is what's motivating her.
And this long-time Cabinet Brexiteer, not just urging colleagues to back the PM, but no longer saying no deal is better than a bad deal. A complete change.
We are not elected to do what we want. We're elected to do what's in the national interest. And ultimately, I hope that across Parliament, we'll recognise that a deal is better than no deal. Businesses do require certainty.
This melee isn't for a celebrity, but for a leading Eurosceptic.
There's absolutely no need to have a big flap.
No need for a big flap, he says. He and his colleagues are only trying to depose the Prime Minister. He and many Brexiteers believe the Prime Minister is signed up to a relationship that's just far too cosy with the EU. So letters are being written to try to force a contest, but they need 48.
We've done our honest best to persuade her not to stick to it. She's made plain that she will, and therefore the party, I'm afraid, now faces a stark choice.
And for you that choice is she has to go?
If it means defending the destiny of our country, which I believe is literally what is now at stake, then reluctantly I'm afraid to say yes, she does.
It's impossible to tell right now if the Tory tussles will end in the Prime Minister leaving office. No one in Westminster knows. Hard for all of us to fathom.
I think it's a complete shambles. Don't know from one day to the next what's happening. Doesn't feel as if there's anybody in power.
What she's been saying for months and just stringing us along until, boom, right at the end, it's too late to say anything, take this or leave it.
I hope they go home for the weekend and they chill off and come back and support her.
Theresa May's team will do everything they can to help her cling on. But neither the Chief Whip nor anyone knows if in days they'll be fighting a vote to oust her or only having the huge job of pushing her Brexit deal through Parliament.
I've never accepted the argument that the Prime Minister can come back with whatever she's cobbled together and say, well, it may not be very good, but the alternative is even worse. In the 21st century, looking at the future of our country, we've got to be able to do better than that.
Tonight, Downing Street appears at least to have a new and calmer cabinet. But we do not know yet, and they don't either, if Theresa May can stay on, because many people in her own party do not wish her well.
And let's talk to Laura in Westminster. As we head into the weekend, how would you assess the mood where you are tonight, Laura?
Well, it feels a bit more peaceful this evening, Jane, but there have been more twists and turns in this than on the Big Dipper. So let's take a look at the big picture about where things have got to. Well, Theresa May could face a vote of no confidence in her leadership, but we probably won't know that until Monday. How many of those letters have really gone in? Have the Brexiteers reached their magic number of 48, which would trigger a vote that could bring the Prime Minister down, at least in theory? But if there were such a vote, would she get through it? Well, maybe so. But even if she does, the bigger question, the one that affects all of our lives really, is will she get a Brexit deal through the Houses of Parliament? And from where we are now, that seems a Herculean task. Now, it is impossible to know that. It's impossible to imagine what might be in the minds of MPs in Parliament if we get to that point. But that is the most serious question being asked right now. Even if she gets through the next few days, and it's thought generally she has a decent chance of doing that, will she be able to drive her Brexit vote through Parliament if she gets that far? And if she can't, well, at that point, frankly, almost anything could happen. There are so many different scenarios that it's impossible really to sketch it out. So tonight things are calmer, but messy and risky. And the dangers for Theresa May certainly haven't gone away.
Laura Koonsberg, thank you. Let's also assess the situation in Brussels and join our correspondent there, Adam Fleming. And how is all of this turmoil being viewed where you are, Adam?
Well, Jane, the other European countries do not want to get involved in the British domestic political situation for fear of making it even worse. The other thing they don't want to do is reopen the negotiations on the Brexit withdrawal treaty, because as far as they're concerned, that is closed. It's done. And that's been said in the last few days by the leaders of Ireland, Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, to name a few. And it was also repeated by the EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier in a private meeting of EU ambassadors here in Brussels this morning. Here, it is full steam ahead to that special Brexit summit, which will take place a week on Sunday. And if you were listening carefully yesterday to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, he said the only thing that would stop it would be something extraordinary. What's happening in Britain isn't considered extraordinary, certainly not yet.
Adam, thank you. Adam Fleming in Brussels. And amidst all this turmoil, many businesses say they're continuing to plan for a no-deal Brexit. The European aircraft manufacturer Airbus has become the latest organisation to say it's working on the basis that Britain will leave the EU without an agreement. And nearly 3/4 of the UK's pharmaceutical imports come from elsewhere in the EU. This morning, Theresa May said she's among those who depend on such supplies because she's diabetic. So how are companies planning to keep medicines coming into the UK if we leave the EU abruptly? Our health correspondent, Catherine Burns, has been finding out.
Medication might not seem like the biggest Brexit issue, but for many patients it's vital. More than 1 million UK diabetics rely on insulin.
This is an issue that actually I feel personally. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I depend on insulin every day. As it happens, my insulin is produced by a company in the European Union.
We barely make any of it, enough for about 2,000 patients. More than 99% of the insulin we import comes from factories in the EU, like this one in Frankfurt. They've already stepped up production ahead of Brexit. This company always likes to keep an extra 10-week supply of medicines in the UK at any given time. But the government has asked drug companies to stockpile an extra 6 weeks in case of a no-deal Brexit.
Insulins, we have to take more care of insulins than for other products because they have a narrow temperature range from 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, and we have to strictly keep these temperature conditions during storage and transportation.
Every day, staff here load more than 500,000 packs of insulin onto lorries to be sent out across the world. And for those going to the UK, this is the start of a 650-mile trip. But Sanofi and other drug companies say they've been preparing for Brexit since almost immediately after the referendum and are confident they've done what it takes to keep supplies flowing.
It's not just insulin, though. Almost 80% of the medications that came into the UK last year were from the EU. Everything from antibiotics and vaccines to stem cell therapy for burns. It's a two-way street, though. Every month we send out 20% more packs of drugs to the EU than we bring in. Drug companies are working hard to make sure the trade carries on flowing in both directions.
We have no choice but to plan for the worst. And that's why the message we're giving is we are planning, we are stockpiling, so the patients don't have to worry.
At the moment, lorries carrying this insulin and other drugs can leave Germany, go straight into France and cross the Channel. They don't even need to pause in Dover. This is what's known as frictionless trade. But a no-deal Brexit could mean an immediate start to customs checks. For now, though, what of the contingency supplies? This insulin has come from Germany to Yorkshire, the start of the stockpile. There are still empty shelves, but with 4 months left until Brexit, the company is confident they'll be full by March. Catherine Burns, BBC News.
Theresa May has turned to her loyalists to repair some of the damage done by yesterday's resignations and to shore up her position. Amber Rudd is returned to Cabinet as Work and Pensions Secretary, and the little-known Stephen Barclay is her third Brexit Secretary within 4 months. The Prime Minister was also offered a lifeline by the Environment Secretary Michael Gove, who has decided to stick with her. More letters calling for Mrs May to quit were lodged by Conservative MPs, but so far it doesn't appear that there's enough to force a leadership challenge. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnin.
She's back. Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary, has rejoined the government as Work and Pensions Secretary and a much-needed ally for Theresa May in the face of opponents calling for her to go.
This is not a time for changing our leader. This is a time for pulling together, for making sure that we remember who we are here to serve, who we are here to help. That's the whole of the country. And I worry sometimes that my colleagues are too concerned about the Westminster bubble rather than keeping their eye on what our job is to serve people.
And in the middle of this picture is Stephen Barclay. This morning he was writing about 2 new tennis courts he'd open in Wisbech. This evening he is the Brexit Secretary. But Number 10 say the former Health Minister will not be negotiating with the EU. The Prime Minister will do that now. She had already been out today selling her deal, appearing on a radio phone-in this morning. Always a risk when you might get a caller asking this.
I respectfully ask you to do the right thing in the national interest and stand down to allow someone from the Brexit camp to take the lead.
In reply, he got the full sales pitch.
You mentioned sovereignty as a really important issue for you, and I think you're absolutely right. For a lot of people who voted leave, what they wanted to do is to make sure that decisions on things like who could come into this country would be taken by us here in the UK and not by Brussels. And that's exactly what the deal I've negotiated delivers.
But she seemed less certain on whether ministers could vote with their conscience on the deal.
Will the Cabinet get a free vote?
We will be, obviously, we're going to be looking at the deal when it comes back. There is Cabinet collective responsibility.
Yeah. But she still faces defeat in the Commons over Brexit, and more Tory MPs are declaring hers is the wrong direction and submitting letters of no confidence.
I'm normally a loyalist, I'm not a natural rebel by any means, but as far as I'm concerned, the destiny of my country is literally at stake now.
The heading on his letter to Sir Graham Brady, the backbench chairman, reads, "She just doesn't listen." But 48 of these letters are needed. How close are we to a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister?
I'm sorry to say I think we're very close. The only person who knows the answer to that question is Sir Graham Brady.
People say they've put their letters in when they haven't. They say they have, and then they withdraw them.
Are you confident
So
you will get those 48 letters?
It's extremely difficult to say because it's a very high bar.
And some leading Brexiters, like Michael Gove, are even staying in the cabinet to argue their case.
I think it's absolutely vital that we focus on getting the right deal in the future and making sure that in the areas that matter so much to the British people, we can get a good outcome.
Penny Mordaunt is also staying, although without evident enthusiasm.
Are you backing the Prime Minister?
Others were more fulsome. A bouquet arrived for the Prime Minister at lunchtime. Her supporters quietly optimistic that she can survive a confidence vote. This afternoon, the Prime Minister returned to her constituency. Her position may be a little less precarious, although her Brexit deal is still in trouble. Carl Din in ITV News, Westminster.
And our political correspondent Libby Vina joins me live now from Downing Street. Barbed wire and bouquets, Libby. In your view, is the Prime Minister more or less secure tonight than she was 24 hours ago?
Well, Alistair, strange political times when a good day is a day on which nobody resigns. But today was a good day within those terms. Nobody did resign. And you saw there Michael Gove, a prominent Leave supporting minister, pledging his support for the Prime Minister. We also had her bringing Amber Rudd back into cabinet, and she was straight out suggesting that people should pull together and get behind the Prime Minister. I also understand that Theresa May herself has been on the phone to constituency chairmen and women this afternoon trying to explain her deal and why they should back it. Now that's important because there are some MPs who were considering putting in letters demanding a vote of no confidence, who wanted to speak to their constituency parties over the weekend. I think critically, if Mrs May has done enough to convince those party chairmen and women that the deal is worth backing, I think that perhaps will dissuade some more MPs from putting their letters demanding a confidence vote in. But we won't know until Monday at the earliest whether she has succeeded.
Libby, thank you.
Brexit has been dominating events at Westminster for another day. Amber Rudd is the new Work and Pension Secretary in a swift return to the political front line, only 6 months since she resigned as Home Secretary over the Windrush scandal. Here's our political correspondent Michael Crick with all the twists and turns as the Prime Minister remains under pressure.
Flowers delivered to Downing Street today show Theresa May does have some friends, and tonight, in a bold move, she brought back into cabinet at Work and Pensions an old ally, Amber Rudd, who made her name in the referendum fighting for Remain.
Welcome.
This April, Rudd resigned as Home Secretary over the Windrush crisis, though a recent report said her officials had been to blame, not her. She's been one of the few MPs publicly to back May's Brexit deal.
I am confident the Prime Minister can survive. I think she's demonstrated this week her complete commitment to making sure that she serves the people she was elected to do so, and she's come forward with a really practical response to leaving the European Union. I think it's the right combination.
And the new Brexit Secretary is the much less well-known Stephen Barclay. He voted Leave, though his job's been downgraded now to just the domestic aspects of Brexit, as Mrs May takes personal control of the negotiations. Meanwhile, Michael Gove, after overnight talk that he might resign, began the day saying nothing.
Are you going to support the Prime Minister, sir? Will you be resigning today, Mr Gove?
Though later said he's staying on. But that could still entail big trouble for the PM. Gove and the Development Secretary Penny Mordaunt are part of a 5-strong Brexiteer group convened by the Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom, which also includes Liam Fox and Chris Grayling.
Those 5 ministers, and other ministers as well perhaps, plan to meet over the next week ahead of the big European summit in Brussels on Sunday the 25th, which is due to agree the withdrawal deal. Now, they plan to force Mrs May to make significant changes to that deal ahead of the meeting. In particular, they want something tangible to explain how Britain might leave
the Irish backstop. And unless they get that something tangible, they're threatening resignations. Most likely Mrs. Leadsom, but possibly some or all of the other ministers as well. It looks like mutiny within the cabinet. But the Prime Minister's not giving up. After almost 4 hours publicly fielding questions yesterday, she spent another half hour on a breakfast phone-in.
I respectfully ask you to do the right thing in the national interest and stand down to allow someone from the Brexit camp to take the lead.
For a lot of people who voted leave, what they wanted to do is to make sure that decisions on things like who could come into this country would be taken by us here in the UK and not by Brussels. And that's exactly what the deal I've negotiated delivers.
But Mark Francois was one of several more Tory MPs today to send letters to the chairman of the 1922 committee calling for a vote of confidence in Mrs May.
The Prime Minister has signed us up to a deal which would make us a vassal state. I cannot vote for that in all conscience. I can't. I won't. And we've spent months in private, as the letter explains, trying to persuade her privately, confidentially, to change her mind. She will not do that, so I'm now on a bound. I have no choice.
So how many letters now, Mr Baker? There are now around 24 MPs who say they've sent such letters. And this Brexiteer leader says they'll soon reach the crucial 48 letters needed to trigger such a vote. But polls suggest that Mrs May is more popular than any of the alternatives.
Polls suggest all sorts of things, but we had a poll that suggested Remain would win the referendum, and then we found that Leave won. We had a poll which suggested that we would have a landslide Conservative victory at the general election, and then we find we're in a hung parliament.
As she left Downing Street for the weekend, Theresa May faced revolt from both backbenchers and part of her cabinet, with still little sign of getting her withdrawal agreement through Parliament.
Well, to pick up all of that, I'm joined now by the Treasury Minister, Mel Stride. Let's talk about Brexit. Let's talk figures. How many Tory MPs have called for a vote of no confidence?
Well, all I know is what you know, which is that it appears that around 20 of my colleagues have come forward and said that they want to have a vote of no contest. And as you will know, 48 is the number that triggers that. And only Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922, knows how many others there might be. Yeah. But it does seem to me that at this stage we are clearly some way short of that.
Let's talk some other figures. If you don't have the DUP and the Labour Party and Conservative Remainers, there's no way this deal is getting through the House of Commons. So what happens? Is your plan B a general election or a referendum?
There is a plan, and the plan is the deal. So
where
this can lead is basically we either row in behind the deal as a parliament, which delivers on the referendum and what the referendum was all about in terms of migration and not paying vast sums to the EU and so on and so forth, and giving us economic certainty and stability going forward. Or Parliament may, or we may end up drifting off into no deal at all, which I believe will be very painful for our country. And
Theresa May said no Brexit is an option. So the question is, how do we get there?
OK, before you jumped in again, I was about to move on to that very point. So the third possibility here, although I think it unlikely because I don't think there'd be a majority in Parliament for it, might be a second referendum. But if you were to go down that route and we didn't end up leaving the EU at all and overturn the result of the June 2016 election, I think you'd be into very, very difficult water indeed in terms of trust in politicians and the repercussions of that. So the best thing for us all to do, and this is what we've got to do over the days and weeks that follow, is to look carefully at that deal and to recognise that we don't take a decision in a vacuum. There are alternatives if we don't go for this deal, and by far the best of these options that I've described is that we row in behind the Prime Minister, and this may happen right across the House, incidentally.
You think Labour might come into Theresa May's support? That's an interesting thought.
Well, I think there could be. I think individually, when all members of Parliament, irrespective of party, have now got to think deeply and very carefully and very seriously about the future of our nation and the future of our country. And are we going to allow it to drift off into falling off a cliff at on March the 29th,
or staying in the European Union?
Or no, as I said, I don't think there's a majority for that. I don't think Parliament will go for that.
Tell us who Steve Barclay is, because a lot of people have been Googling him today.
Steve Barclay is a fantastic minister. I've worked with him at the Treasury, I also worked with him in the Whip's office. He's a highly intelligent, very analytical, detailed thinker, which I think is very important for the role that he's got. And he's extremely good with people, which is clearly going to be important in the role that he has. And he will be a very popular choice tonight that the Prime Minister's made. And of course, he's a Brexiteer, so he has his heart is in the position that he's taken on.
Mel Stryfe, thank you very much. Resignations, no deals and an embattled Prime Minister, and that's just how the British media is reporting Brexit. But how is the rest of the world taking the news? Today, in our Brexit Minute, we look at how everyone else is looking at us. Donald Trump's favourite channel, Fox News, sought out the hard Brexit views of Nigel Farage, their go-to pundit.
It is the worst deal in history.
Meanwhile, our friends in the Netherlands, Dutch channel RTL,
Brexit. Maar wat nu?
did their best to hide their disbelief, saying Brexit is a soap opera that's far from over.
Brexit.
In Paris, France 24 lapped up all the talk of palace coups and snap elections.
She's weathered a lot of storms in her 2.5 years as Prime Minister.
And what about the front pages? Well, Britain's reputation for unflappable stability is taking a hammering. It's not the deal that's being talked about, it's whether Theresa May can hold on to power. From the Irish Times describing the embattled May, to the New York Times talking of Britain's leader takes a bruising, and Spain's La Vanguardia, which says Theresa May is holding on despite resignations. There are 133 days to Brexit. Maybe.